Perfect. Well, welcome everybody who's already here. We might wait just a couple extra minutes so people can join the Facebook live stream. But then I will do a brief introduction and hand it over to our virtual artists in residence. So yeah, sit tight with us for just an extra minute or two here.
Also, I just wanted to say, I'm eating. I'm not trying to be rude without my face on the camera. I just don't think you want to see me chewing, but thank you for being here.
Thanks for being here. Okay. Let's go ahead and get started. So welcome everyone. So tonight is an exciting night. We have artist lectures by our two current virtual artists in residencies here at the Indianapolis Art Center. We will have kind of a double feature hearing from Rana Young and Zora J. Murff on the projects that they've been working on and their overall artistic practices. So the format of tonight, we will first hear from Rana Young, followed by a brief opportunity for Q&A. So as she's presenting, feel free to drop any questions that come up into the chat, either that being on the Facebook live stream, or if you're in the Zoom chat, you can also type those out there. And we will read those out at that point when she's finished her presentation. And then after that Q&A, we will hear from Zora J. Murff, who will conclude tonight's presentations, and we will have a second round of Q&A for him. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to hearing from our artists. And at this point, I will hand it over to Rana. You can screen share and get this ball rolling. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Alex. Especially thank you for all of your time and labor dedicated to this program that we're a part of. I also want to give a special thanks to Colton Pedro, the sort of original invitee or inviter to the program. And just really appreciate the opportunity to have this sort of dedicated time and support to work towards this project. And even more special is speaking with not necessarily alongside, but in the same hour as my husband Zora. So although we collaborate often, we we do make a lot of personal work, personal projects that are very different. So tonight should be a nice variety for you. Very different work. Okay, I'll get started. I do have some audio and video stuff happening in the presentation. So I definitely want to make you all aware of that. So if things are glitching or we're having any issues, I have no problem taking a pause and correcting those things. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. That way, at least that part is done. Okay. And then can everybody see this okay? Maybe just one person let me know.
It looks good.
Yeah,
okay.
it looks good.
Awesome, thank you. So again, my name is Rana. So just that's what you can call me, just my first name there. Just wanted to put it on screen again, as I do have an uncommon name that can be hard to remember at times. But I'm going to talk about a personal project I've been working on for, it seems like forever now, but definitely like 5 years, I would say. Taking it, pretty seriously, but definitely under a framework that I've been thinking about much longer. I do want to say that, or provide maybe a little bit of a trigger warning here, is I do have some sensitive images just having to do with like life and death that might be sensitive to some people. So I just want to let you know that ahead of time. So to begin, again, I'm going to talk about this project called Lie and Smile. And before I get into it too much, I'll just say that I was super excited to have this opportunity again to work, to sort of really dedicate some time. It actually enabled me to, for the first time ever, to not have to teach this summer. And as much as I love teaching, it is nice to have a break for myself in my work. So this really gave me a moment to really like dig in, especially in terms of just like thinking about this work, researching, and then starting to piece together, you know, how that might impact where the visuals go. So this lecture is very much a sort of introduction to the work, what I feel comfortable showing right now. And then I'll sort of close with a format that I intend to expand on more in the future. But I guess we'll see what I'm talking about here in a minute. So I will say that my, you know, complicated relationship with photographs started when I was pretty young. I typically start out my lectures like detailing that because I think it's important to acknowledge like when we, you know, when one started to sort of look at pictures and really sort of acknowledge them as these sort of portals and seeing oneself or seeing something unfamiliar or something that maybe draws out some curiosity. So much so that, you know, when I was little, I would even, you know, find images and publications and sort of march them to my dad, prepared with a lot of questions. And that had a lot to do with the fact that I was, you know, raised by a single father. He was very much in charge of answering all my questions independently most of the time growing up. And I definitely, you know, consider myself being someone that, you know, grew up in a sort of non-traditional family structure, home-wise. And seeing images, you know, be them in books, magazines, on, you know, television, portraying what I call, you know, the wholeness of family. So this idea that, you know, we're seeing what is, you know, the nuclear family, what is sort of like normalized as a family unit, really contradicted my reality most of the time. And those psychological impressions certainly provoked my curiosity at a young age, and I think would later propel me to begin to solve some of these mysteries of what exists beyond the scene depicted. And like those we love, you know, I think I started to notice as a young person that photographs can deceive us. And although visual analysis and interpretation can lead us to, you know, many truths, and a single frame can beg many questions, you know, the most subtle clues might evoke an individual's or, you know, a viewer's aversions or desires. And that negotiation that emerges between recognizing and then challenging those perceived truths really continues to direct my approach to the medium. So through this project, Lie and Smile, which is very much ongoing, I am interrogating this, the estranged relationship that I had with my biological mother. So she passed away about 5 years ago in October of 2017, so shy of 5 years. And I was 34 years old at the time. And I bring that up because my mother was 34 years old when she had me. In the wake of her death, I was flooded with pretty brutal internal questions. You know, did I love my mother? Did I even really know her at all? How could I possibly, you know, miss what I never really had? And I had to really meditate on those questions. And I began investigating the lived experiences that directed her persistence to what I found out later to conceal years of endured trauma in her life. So when we're thinking about at large, starting a project. I was very much in the thick of that about 6 months after her passing. And I knew I had to act on this sort of instinct of really diving into this work, something that I always sort of wanted to start, but I didn't really feel like I had it in me to for a while. And I'll get more into that in a bit. So I'm taking us back to summer of 2018. My now husband and I had decided to come down to Arkansas for work. And I was going a little crazy about approaching this project, but again, felt a sense of urgency to exercise what I sort of think of now as this fear I had and possibly still carry of who my mother was. In short, there's a lot I could say, but in short, it's important, I think, to introduce sort of the beginnings of my life, or how I came to understand my mother, maybe a little bit more objectively. So my mother was incarcerated on drug distribution charges in Columbia, Missouri, which is my birthplace, and also ironically, where my father was attending law school at the time. And all this was all while I was just, a toddler. So I was born there and I was roughly 2 years old. I was young enough that I don't really recall any of that or any of those circumstances. The memory, I think, didn't really register. And even more so, possibly because my dad gained full custody, which is the ultimate access, maybe, full custody of me immediately. And within a few months, we moved to St. Louis. So that's where I typically say that I'm from, because I moved there at such a young age. And I lived in St. Louis until I was 21. It, wasn't until puberty that I began asking more questions about her. So I, becoming really increasingly curious about her history and about the physical characteristics and personality traits that I inherited from a woman I didn't know. And I remember my dad saying, "Your mother was lonely, the kind of lonely company can't fix." He believed that she lived in her own fantasy world where deception could masquerade as charm. And that was evidenced to him by a pattern of impulsivity and familial neglect. And he'd vaguely explain that, she'd been hurt many times in her life, and navigating her life as a sort of chameleon must have been a result of that. Now, to be fair, and I'm thinking this is early 80s, priorities may have been a little different. Who knows? But given the circumstances, it's likely my dad never really knew my mother that well. I'm thinking in just 6 short years, I've been, in a committed relationship with my husband longer than my parents ever even knew each other. And as we all know, you can increasingly find out more and more about someone every day, every year, that you're sort of close to them. So it's possible, perhaps they didn't know each other that well. I had maintained contact with my sister. She's 11 years older than me and was my mother's daughter, our mother's daughter from a previous marriage. And Christina, my sister, was 13 when our mother was arrested and had witnessed far more of my mother's life. Again, our mother's life, I keep saying mine, but our mother's life, by that time. And she became who I could turn to when I turned 18, and her being, almost 30 by then, when I was ready to meet our mother for the first time. So I made this trip up to Lincoln, Nebraska, where they were both living. So I drove my 7 hours up there as an 18-year-old. And, from that moment, really, until her passing, we, I think we both worked to build a relationship on and off. However, I do feel I was sort of continuously met with a very similar version of her that my father had experienced. You know, she would rarely speak of her past and was often quick to redirect conversations to be about me or about the future. When I was 21, a few years later, my sister opened up a little bit more and began revealing what our mother had experienced in her life. Things like, you know, being raised by an emotionally and physically abusive father and what they believe was a disassociative, mother, and experiencing sexual trauma at the hands of men, as you know, as both a young girl and a woman, including from my sister's biological father. And I remember it really vividly. My sister expressed, you know, this paranoia that we had descended from a cursed matrilineal line, and went on to, describe her own experiences with trauma that she had, you know, also suppressed for quite some time. And it simultaneously, to me, felt like a warning and a reminder that I had somehow sort of escaped what appeared to be a cycle. So after completing my undergraduate studies in the Pacific Northwest, I applied explicitly to the University of Nebraska, intending to make work about my mother during my MFA residency. And as we all know, things don't always go according to plan. And but I recognize now that much like the work I did wind up making with a former partner of mine, you know, I really needed, or I guess I needed what I sort of lacked from my mother, which was, you know, more time and more access and trust from her that was really hard to come by. And at times, you know, being in school as well, I can admit that, you know, it's sometimes emotionally hard for me to prioritize our relationship, just in, you know, in the context of making work to show then to, you know, the public and those things. So I feel like while I sort of set out to do this much earlier, I didn't find myself in the appropriate environment, although it was certainly set up to be one. But emotionally, it sort of didn't match that for me. But I did spend those years in Nebraska, you know, really sort of observing, investigating more. I would, you know, visit the towns that she had lived in. I would talk to my sister about her sort of endlessly. And I really imagined my life had she raised me there. And so Nebraska really is this hypercharged landscape for me now. And it became and remains I call it my what if place. So since that October, almost 5 years ago, you know, I've been receiving parts of her archive that were stored in multiple storage units or at my aunt and uncle's farmhouse in rural Nebraska. And along with photographs of our family and even me as a baby, which I hadn't seen a photograph of myself before the age of like 4, you know, until like pretty recently in the big picture of things. And you know, I also started to uncover these other sort of items of hers in the storage units with my siblings. And so we found things that we sort of classify maybe as like mystic paraphernalia. So things like crystal balls and tarot cards and all sorts of items. But also, you know, many poems that she had written while she was in prison. And also the 28-page police report detailing her arrest. And for me, you know, that details arguably the most significant day of my life. The most jarring thing about that police report are the narrative accounts for me. So each officer that was involved, and I think there was 4 of them, all had to give their own individual sort of account, and that was transcribed for discovery. And her full name is only listed once at the beginning of each transcription. So any other time she's mentioned, it reads, Young did this, Young said that, right? And sharing her last name, it's becoming harder and harder not to sort of like subconsciously implicate myself in her circumstances. Of course, I can't, help but think of my sister as well through all of this, who's been my sort of ride or die through this process of not only uncovering more of who our mother was, but also, connecting with her and, just sort of being present for each other and getting to know each other better in a lot of ways. Given our age difference, that was sort of hard. It was harder to relate to one another the younger we were. And unfortunately, my sister's, life experiences were much different than mine. And she is facing really sort of similar situation that our mother was. So since February of 2019, my sister has been awaiting federal prison sentencing on charges almost identical to our mother's. And delays during the pandemic, have created a weird sort of time gap where these delays opened up a lot of time for her and I to connect during this moment that, making this work has taken a real priority. So it's a little serendipitous that sort of worked out, but then it's been this sort of impending like thing, that is hovering over us the whole time. But it afforded us again with sort of time. And with that time comes, some bit of freedom for my sister. So she's able to access these day passes where I can go up and visit her and we can spend days together. And that really, enabled both of us to sort of acquire as much of our mother's archive as we could. Otherwise, it likely would have sat untouched, locked in storage units for a really long time, perhaps even forever. So there become all these parallels that I'm sort of dealing with, and it can be hard to articulate all of them in this context because there's so much I sort of want to fill people in on or catch people up on to get viewers where I sort of want them to be. But I think sort of bringing it to the basics, the sort of basic framework is important, and establishing, some context and sort of what I'm looking at bigger picture here in terms of family dynamic structure, trauma, circumstances. And there's just so many puzzle pieces. And as I retrace her history, I'm sort of thinking of how to communicate that better to other people. And then also how my considerations might sort of molt into these visual metaphors for circumstance and underscore the precarious bond between photographic record and the fragmented and abstract nature of memory. Shared and discovered familial narratives have really sort of aided me in rendering this visual elegy that mirrors the process of mining my mother's archive and our matrilineal succession. And through responding to her archive and her absence in my life, I'm definitely constructing these prosthetic memories to reinterpret her life and also embalm her death. And framing these versions of my mother or her life to confront or forgive, I describe as, sustaining this sort of negotiation with her ghost. And I'm also perhaps, rendering versions that I can, at times confront or even forgive. Either way, her likeness definitely hangs in the air. So while I can't, change her past, our past, I definitely want to keep her company for a while. And that's really led me to consider alternative ways to share parts of this series, as I said, as well as the periphery context, maybe, that is always sort of like lurking or around, or maybe I share, you know, with them, my sister and my mother both, all while maybe providing less autobiographical information. So sort of thinking of different structures, different ways to allow people to enter the work without having to sort of give a rundown of a timeline necessarily. Early in the pandemic, I was invited to share some of my images and, you know, briefly talk about the work through Marble Hill Camera Club out of New York. So it was a sort of Zoom speaker situation, and we each had about 10 minutes or 15 minutes maybe to share, you know, a little sort of glimpse into what we were working on. And that day that I was giving my presentation happened to be my mother's birthday. So I decided to create or sort of write this multimedia letter that includes audio and video, and maybe, you know, maybe it's more of a spoken word, or I don't even know how to classify it at this point. It feels a bit more performative for sure. And I want to share that letter again with you all, because it is definitely something that I've only been able to share once, I believe, but something I really want to build off of. And I've been thinking a lot more about during these last couple of months. So with that said, I'm going to close with that letter today. Happy birthday, Mom. Christina got your message on Monday. I thought I'd feel something good, something different. I felt safer with myself knowing exactly where you were. Please stretch yourself thin enough, and I'll put away what you've claimed of me, what they claimed of you. I'll put away your absence. Just like you put away our milk, yours and mine.
Hey, it's Mom. Just calling to check on you. See how things are in Lincoln. I'll talk to you some other time. Love you. Bye-bye.
But not hers. You remembered to pour it out in front of her, and you knew it was expired. At least she didn't lie. Like I'd even know what to do. I do keep looking for you though, but it's not a fucking movie. Although I did describe it that way to Dad recently, like I've been directing a horror film. He said your favorites were determined a long time ago, so I'd better be writing it for me. He's speaking for you again. How did you ever let that happen in the first place? Can you love us back? Smile, pink stained lips. I'd believe you, but I'm the only one who does. And I should really stop writing in your diary.
Hi, it's Mom. Just calling to check on you. I'll talk to you some other time. Love you. Bye-bye.
I can't stop deceiving myself through these prosthetic memories. Pseudo love, place, touch, self. I'm not even sure if I knew what feeling like this looked like until now. A friend reminded me that horror also lives in daylight. Is that where I should start looking for you? You know, we're sensitive to light, but perhaps saving face will numb it all.
Hello, it's your mother. Maybe you could give me a call sometime. Talk to you later. Love you. Bye.
You know, it took me a year to recognize your voice. And just as I started to hear myself, you died again. Only this time, you really are in the wind. You know, I used to tell my friends you were a flight attendant. Clever, right? Was this you being clever? It stayed with me, contoured to my psyche, ears ringing. It felt like surviving you. I should have told the truth. Fuck in-flight Wi-Fi and fuck Facebook Messenger. And you should have closed those women's eyes staring at me like she could fix it. Company can't fix this, remember? And that road that we shared narrowed as we descended. So tell me, how is she tethered to me longer than you? And the sky didn't swallow me like you promised. And I learned how to be quiet that day. But Christina taught me how to scream long before that. Your body was never without mine. Can't lie about that. The last contract. Is that why you cried out for me? Because I stayed under your skin, didn't I? And you were negotiating with my ghost too.
Hello, it's me. Just calling to check on you. You haven't answered my last several calls, so I just wondered if you might this one. Talk to you later. Love you. Bye-bye.
I love you too. I'll call you tomorrow. And that's a wrap. So I'm going to take it off sharing so I can come back to you guys. Okay. Oh, thank you. All
Thank you so
righty.
much, Rana.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for letting me share. That was, yeah, I'm just so appreciative of any opportunity to sort of, yeah, be vulnerable with other people. So thank you.
Yeah, it was really, really powerful.
Oh, thank you. I know I can barely get through it without getting a little choked up still. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I want to ask you questions, but I also don't want to cry.
No, it's fine. So it's funny. The last time, the other time I did this, I'll just say that I understand if right now is not the appropriate time to ask questions. If you need a minute, because understandable, it's heavy stuff. My husband after me will not disappoint in the same way. We deal with some heavy things. So all of that to be said that, and I can put my information's out there. So feel free to email me or hit me up on Instagram or whatever. And I'm happy to talk to anybody sort of one-on-one if that makes more sense, as this is a live thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much. Like, I think that the work just has so much power behind it. And thank you for sharing the vulnerable side of you, because I think that really, it does a lot for people. So
yeah, I hope it can be a space where it creates like connection, because I think we all know what loss feels like on some level, right? So I think it's a reminder that, we don't always have to cope with those things alone, because clearly it affects us. So yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you.
absolutely. So I do have a couple questions that have come in the chat. One was about the media that you use, being photography. So I wonder, maybe you could talk a little bit about like the process of taking your photos. Like, to what extent are they staged or more candid? Yeah,
that's a great question. I'm almost like to this point where I've stopped saying like I'm a photographer, only because as much as I love photography, as a medium, but I almost am like sort of shifting to really identifying more as like an image maker. And that distinction might not be as clear for some people, but for me, images, exist on far more planes than just like a physical photograph does. And so for me, it's like, how can I communicate, especially under this framework, in the various ways that I need to when it comes to image quality, all of those things, because I'm thinking about the past. I'm thinking about, again, periphery context, which is heavily image based. And, when I entered into art, which I always felt like I snuck in the back door a little bit. I tell people that, I didn't have the most like traditional art education that a lot of my students have. So I sort of feel like I snuck in a little bit. And the program that I went to was at Portland State University in Oregon. And we didn't have like a sort of photo major, right? It's like you could BFA, you could do like a general sort of studio art BFA, but you sort of elected your own thing. And photography was so tiny there. I had one professor at the time. I gained another one my last year, but other than that, it was just so limited. And I think the field at that moment also was, when at least the people I was looking at the time, it was pretty series based, in the sense where it not only working under this sort of idea, this framework, right, which a lot of us are doing, but you're sort of making images that all visually sort of go together traditionally. So it becomes a more serial way of working, where you sort of make one image and then the others sort of follow suit, right? And they carry this very similar aesthetic. You can sort of link them together without even trying that hard. And when I thought about making my first, photographic body of work, it was definitely leaning that way, where I felt like I had to make under a sort of formula in a sense, because I was so new to the game. And I didn't give myself a lot of freedom to experiment in the same way. And so in grad school, I made my first body of work, via photography. And you can tell it all sits under this one thing visually, which I appreciate that for that work. But for this work, that felt a lot more complicated. So I mix everything from cell phone images to scanned photographs or scanned film that I, sort of doctor, right, digitally. And I do a lot of, pro image capture digitally with large sensors and things like that. Yeah, so I mix a lot of different kinds of images together. I think my primary aesthetic is definitely present, like the sort of constructed digital work. So I can say that all my images are pretty much, you could classify as constructed, but it definitely, they also fall weirdly under this sort of other umbrella, which is more ambiguous the more you sort of study it, which, might be considered more documentary too, where, I'm sort of a weird hybrid of the two, where my images are definitely like lying, but what image isn't lying on some level? So there's some things to discuss in that realm for sure. So, but yeah, I mix everything, every kind of image you can think of. I try to utilize in this work. So you'll see things from, a contemporary image that I made, 2 months ago with a pro Nikon camera, digital camera, to my sister's selfies that she took on a cell phone 7 years ago, that has like the shittiest resolution ever. But I think it's important that I don't try to recreate some of those moments in our lives, because I can't do it the same way. And it certainly wouldn't communicate the same thing for me. But also, like, more and more, like, what is a photograph? What sort of deserves to be in a certain context image wise? And I think that this is a really right moment to start to question those things and ask ourselves, like, why we place certain value on a certain kind of picture or a certain kind of image or object versus others, just because they were made differently. So that's sort of what I'm thinking about and how that works, I guess.
Yeah, no, I think that was really eloquently stated. Really interesting to see how all of those things kind of fold and unfold for you throughout this body of work. And so I have another question that came in the chat, which I think kind of dovetails this quite nicely. So they said, I really enjoyed your presentation, including the variety of digital media, both visual and audio. Through the development of your work, have you found that your connections to personal memories are experienced most strongly through photographs, videos, audio recordings, or written words?
100%. That's a great question. I appreciate it so much. Because, and as an individual person, just, non-artist, thinking about it, just me as Rana, I cope with my own like mental health issues. I have ADHD, I have depression, I have a lot of things that come from my childhood, or it has been explained to me that way. And what I found out more and more through therapy and just like sort of learning more about myself is that I really suppressed a lot of my childhood. Like it's just sort of blocked out. And I think that's common for a lot of people, especially like, I think a lot of people may have memories, as early as maybe 4 or 5. There's definitely the argument that, are those memories, or is it sort of a story that was implanted or a photo that was implanted? Who knows? But it's hard for me to remember before I was like 12, honestly. And so when I think about pictures, especially the ones that I saw of myself much younger when I was older, 100%, I feel like it's hard to know what to trust visually, which makes it hard to know what to trust up here, right? it becomes a really sort of daunting process of like how my likeness was communicated, and that started to make me pick apart like who took this photo, who made this photograph. Was it, whose vantage point is this? My sister's, my dad's, my mom's, like who was looking at me in this way. And most of my archive of like me was made by my dad, which is really fascinating to me. It was my dad looking at me and recording those things. And so I think that makes me, or helps me feel like I can piece it together a little bit more, because I can go to him and ask him things. But nothing's totally clear all the time. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
I'm sure we can all relate a little bit. It's like, who knows what the truth is anymore?
Yeah. I mean, I think you see it kind of in a wider cultural sense, like in media and news narratives. And I think all of us deal with it personally too.
Yeah. Oh yeah. 100%.
I had another question. I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how teaching affects your creative process in one way or the other.
Yeah, I think it's complicated because I really enter a classroom like as myself. I try to, at least. I try to be pretty transparent about where I come from, how I got here, and how that pathway was different than maybe what you hear about most often. And that's okay. That, there are many ways to get where you want to go. And so for me, to introduce myself that way, and then knowing that I'm a Google search away for my students, I don't want to leave a lot up to, guessing in terms of what my priorities are in making work, or what I make work about, or what I sort of trust as appropriate work at large. So I think in teaching, I just try to talk about or bring out, these sort of more personal narratives. I'm fortunate that I work, I'm in a position where I can craft like classroom experiences in terms of like thematic things, or, content, whatever, however, I want to design it. And so teaching like a special topics class, like diaristic image making, is a way that I feel like I really get to like dig in those ways. But then in maybe more introductory courses or tech-based courses, trying to slip that in through, assignment prompts and things like that, where things become more self-reflective. It's an opportunity for students to maybe share things about themselves that maybe they've never shared before, which has definitely happened through, some photographic, you could say, essays or sequences or projects. And that, I think when you're witnessing that from your peers, at least that's how I was affected in school, when you're witnessing that within your peers, you're probably more inclined to contribute to that conversation, or even add to it, or bring up something equally as like vulnerable, right, that isn't maybe talked about enough. So I think there's careful consideration from sort of all sides on how we can be looked at as people, and how our work reflects that. And I feel like that's how we all should navigate people before anything. But also like, how that can tie into these sort of core objectives that we want to hit through, education too. So yeah, trying to hybridize, trying to bridge it.
Yeah. I think I got a good sense of your kind of teaching philosophy through that.
Yeah.
That was good to hear too.
Nice.
Yeah.
I feel bad. I'm like, Zora, I'm eating up your time.
I think I have time for maybe one more question. If there is any others, it can either be thrown in the chat, or if you are in the Zoom, you can.
Sure, I had a question. It's kind of also a comment. One, you were talking about like finding space to be vulnerable, and that you're not necessarily like, intentionally selective, but when that time is there for you. And I think in hearing you speak, you always know that you're doing something when you start to place yourself into different narratives that you're hearing, how you can relate. And one of the things you said was horror also lives in the daytime, that you had the conversation with your friend. And that has like been playing in my head, thinking through the amount of people who say like, I'm okay in the day, but it's at night that I feel the most pain. And I'm the complete reverse, where it's like the day feels so long to have to survive when you're experiencing loss. And at night I'm more focused because everything becomes silent. So I get time to actually just kind of be at peace. Right. So in thinking about that, I'm curious as to where you find yourself most productive and what productive means to you in the work that you're doing. And if that does play into place, time, context, or if it's really just organically, it hits and I'm ready.
Yeah, thank you. It's a great question. I feel like I'm going to probably lean more towards when it hits, you know what I mean? It's like, it's been, here we have this moment of poor me, working artist, right? It's like there's definitely moments where, you know, we just want to be, all of us want to be left alone, right? To like focus on what we want to do. And life is at odds with that a lot of the time. And sort of these pesky jobs we got to have, right? So it's complicated where I feel most productive over like sort of breaks, when I can sort of look forward or schedule out like a moment where I can say notifications off. This is, you know, I don't have to be anywhere at this time, blah, blah, blah. So that's quite like, you know, literal. So that's why this opportunity was very wonderful. But I think for me, it's like these moments where I'm almost like in limbo. Like, I think I've done I've maybe had my most epiphanies or something. Like just sitting at a light, you know, in a car, like when you're just sort of sitting there, or a certain like song comes on, or you get a voicemail from somebody. It's like these like small things. And I think that's what I've been really trying to like dig into, because there's so much more influencing and impacting me and this work that I want to make outside of art, or what we've sort of put in the art sort of umbrella, where it's like, of course, I'm looking at other people's work and thinking about like, you know, my canon and where I sort of situate myself and all those things. But life at large has been the highest, like, or most impactful directive probably. So it's all those little things that sort of come together when you start sort of creating relationships between like things that don't really go together, but then you start reading into them differently. There's actually a name for that. I can't remember it. But yeah, moments like that where it's like that in between meditative time when you're sort of not expecting it, probably. Yeah. And then I'm like, shit, I gotta pull over and put this in my notes.
Awesome. Well, thank you again so much, Rana. That presentation was really, really amazing. Yeah, no, thank you. Virtual round of applause for you. That was really great. So at this time, we will transition over to our second speaker of the evening. And I will do just a brief little introduction for Zora. So Zora J. Murff is an artist and educator living in Arkansas. He is interested in the social capacities and functions of images, specifically the many realities born from the creation of Blackness inside of the so-called American context, 1619 to present day. The core of Murph's practice is on how we process information from images and how that information relates in social phenomena. As a social object, images are made, witnessed, and used in different time contexts, which creates the opportunity for discourse and the generation of new knowledge. This means that images possess the ability to be contextualized and can therefore vacillate between an object of harm and a tool for liberation. Right, and I will hand it over to you, Zora.
Yeah, all right, thank you. Yeah, this evening I'm just going to share some writing that I've done on the residency, and then a mixture of works, you know, that I've made previously, but also some other things that I've made. during the residency as well. I'm also going to turn off my video. I'm just having some connection issues, so I just want to make sure I reserve bandwidth for that. Does everything look good?
Yep, looks good.
All right, cool. Yes, I'm going to read an essay that I wrote titled Racial Paradox. The American Negro has come as near to being the victim of a complete rejection as our society has been able to work out. For the dehumanized image of the Negro, which white Americans carry in their minds, the anti-Negro epithets that continuously on their lips exclude the contemporary Negro as truly as though he were kept in a steel prison, and doom even those Negroes who are yet unborn. Richard Wright wrote that for a book titled Black Metropolis in 1945.
Shut up! 50 years ago they had you upside down with a fucking fork up your ass! You can talk, you can talk, you can talk your brain now, motherfucker! Roll his ass out, he's a nigger! He's a nigger! He's a nigger!
Oh my God.
A nigger! Look, there's a nigger! Ooh! Ooh! All right, you see? It shocks you to see what's buried beneath your stupid motherfuckers! What was it called for? It's not called for you to on my ass, you cheap motherfucker! You guys have been talking and talking and talking! I don't know.
You guys are going
What's
nuts.
the matter? Is it too much for you to handle? They're coming. They're gonna arrest me for calling a black man a nigger.
Shit. Hey, you don't beat the fuck time.
Wait a minute, where's he going?
I'm called for it. Hey, don't call me a nigga.
Cracker ass? Call him cracker ass, nigga!
I like you. I'm a bad.
Oh, you threatening me?
What's you, son?
Oh, it's a big threat. That's how you get back at the man.
That was real called for.
Wait a minute, he's not going, is he?
You're just not funny. That's why you recheck. Never had no show, never had no movie. Seinfeld, that's it.
Oh, I guess you got me there. You're absolutely right. I'm just a wash-up. Gotta stand on the stage. Oh, absolutely. And that's it. We had it. We had it. And that is
That's not a call for it. Oh, no, that ain't necessary.
well, you interrupted me, pal. That's what happens when you interrupt the right man. You let him jump you down.
Call for it. Comedy. That was uncalled for.
Yeah, you see, there's still those words.
Race is at the same time real and not real, because its meaning is variable based under the context in which it is understood. For example, in 1682, the Virginia House of Burgesses passed legislation limiting American citizenship to Europeans, whites, and categorizing anyone non-white as slaves to all intents and purposes. In 1865, the 13th Amendment was ratified, which abolished slavery within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. Both of these examples demonstrate a global difference in how race is understood and used in the context of time and geography. In addition to context, sometimes the means through which oppression is meted is paradoxical. The propagation of divisive concepts, or Senate Bill 627, now Act 1100, is the state of Arkansas's version of the anti-critical race theory legislation now popular across the United States. The act partially defines a divisive concept as the concept that an individual should be discriminated against or receive adverse treatment solely or partly because of his or her race. And an individual's moral character is necessarily determined by his or her race. There exists ample American history of open and nuanced white supremacist engagement and discriminatory and adverse treatment of non-white people, and the perpetuation of racist attitudes towards non-whites through the creation of stereotyped representations. The idea of white supremacists using anti-racism to uphold white supremacy is an irony I can hardly bear. Furthermore, Black people are trapped inside of a society that is anti-Black, capitalistic, and patriarchal, and are indoctrinated, both subtly and willingly, with ideals and norms that promote their demise. Jared Sexton and Anthony Farley present this paradigm as a continued enslavement, and in their eyes, all emancipation provided was a surface freedom over actual liberation. All forms of anti-Black oppression started as overt violence and exclusion. We have been tricked into assuming that the adoption of progressive attitudes and the application of social shame will abolish violent mores. However, violent intentions are maintained by agents of the white state who evolve violent means into more nuanced or less visible practices. For example, Black codes evolving into Jim Crow laws, manipulated into redlining and gerrymandering. Sexton and Farley illustrate the traps rigging well. Sexton states, "The perfection of slavery issues forth from the slave's desire for equality itself, from the dream work aimed at participation in slave society." And Farley writes, "It seems that after a division of mental and manual labor appears, that the slave is assigned the latter and the master is assigned the former. All is not as it seems. The slave actually does the mental work that keeps the structure from falling apart. The slave dreams of rights and equal justice under law. The production of dreams is the slave's true and secret function. The slave produces all of the equations that stabilize the system of death over life through its prayers for equal rights. The slave's prayer resolves all present contradictions into white over Black, for white over Black is all that equal rights or law can ever be or become." Living under the regime of whiteness creates a reality where we are taught to internalize self-hatred. Through our participation in the system, because we must do so to survive, we subsume aspirations for social stations inside of white supremacist hierarchies. And in the most unfortunate cases, use the master's tools to enact harm unto our kinfolk. Effectively, we have, albeit subconsciously, become our own overseers. I find myself in the paradox of being racialized. Before you can understand what I mean by that, there are some facts you must decide to believe as true. Facts. Racialization is a social technology. Therefore, the problems born from it are social matters understood through the lenses of various social phenomena. White people created race as a means to establish dominance through racial hierarchy. The white desire to use race to control other people has led to a massive and persistent legacy of racial oppression. White people manipulated race in the establishment and development of the United States of America to create white privilege systems. When one considers race inside of the American context, whiteness must be understood as inherently flawed or harmful. If you're a white person, the social ills whiteness causes are something you are responsible for reckoning with if you are truly committed to supporting the abolition of anti-Blackness. To combat the problems whiteness has created requires the development and deployment of new social technologies and the further evolution of existing ones that validate and prioritize the viewpoints of those individuals who have been marginalized. I am employed by a predominantly white institution that has been asked through requirements of an endowment or financial gift to be constructed as a model for inclusion and diversity. Inclusion and diversity in this specific context are social technologies used to change the social makeup, racial, economic, sexual, gender, ethnic, nationality, and ability identities of the body of people who work, learn, and teach inside of the institution. The work of inclusion and diversity manifests in different ways, but is ultimately meant to destabilize hegemonic environments by inviting people from varied backgrounds in. This describes one way I find myself trapped inside of a racial paradox. The remedy of creating an inclusive and more diverse space is often only considered from its face, with little, if any, resource dedicated to reflection and foresight. The lack of reflection and foresight are the overlooking of the questions: how and why is our environment racially hegemonic? And how will problems stemming from that racial hegemony persist and continue to exclude non-white people unless we change them? In the briefest terms, it plays out this way. Someone says, this space is hella white, so we whites should get non-white people and our problem of racial hegemony is solved. In this scenario, maintaining the established racial hierarchy is the intention. Keep white above all and everything else underneath. Whiteness is the standard, or priceless, while all other racial identities are commodities whose value is set against the standard. Any one non-white is perceived as a token that will bring the institution value. Once I, the so-called token, decides to enter the so-perceived white space, I am expected to fall in line with white conventions, and anything outside of that is seen as irreparable sin, deviating from the grand white plan. When these expectations are inevitably revealed to me, I have a choice to make. I can decide to disappear parts of myself to align with the standard. I can decide to be present but disengaged. Or I can decide to do me throughout and suffer the consequences. My relationship with the institution brings both value and conflict. I always opt to do me. I decide to openly address how white hegemony has and continues to create and uphold privilege systems within the institution I participate. This often means calling out the ills of whiteness amongst a community of mostly white people who have difficulty finding the fortitude necessary to be self-critical about the harm whiteness inherently causes. I am in an immediate adversarial position with the institution. and my colleagues, because of mass inability or refusal to be truly critical of whiteness, a root from which the lyncher's tree of anti-Blackness stems. I have included an anecdote of such an experience I had in 2020 to clarify. The School of Art where I work exists under the J. William Fulbright College of Arts and Sciences. J. William Fulbright was a former state senator and segregationist. J. William Fulbright signed the segregationist Southern Manifesto in 1956. A university unit is named after a segregationist, and there is also a statue of him on our campus. In my university email signature, I included a link to a Twitter post by a School of Art student, Jacob Campbell. A picture of the Fulbright statue with a black sheet over it and a sign propped in front of the statue that reads, "In need of a new statue, preferably not a segregationist." I created the link to participate in a conversation about anti-Blackness and institutionalized racism within the university community, a community I am deciding to be a member of and that allegedly accepts me. I was asked to remove this link by university relations because there is a policy barring employees from publicly engaging in political speech during working hours. They asked me to erase my contribution to this conversation out of fear of someone making a complaint. I made it into a work of art. Fulbright signed the segregationist Southern Manifesto in 1956. Each one teach one, still accessible through my email signature. I did this because by making it art, the institution would have to question its presence as such. In doing so, the institution is dangerously close to asking me not to do the work they have hired and lauded me for. Playground politics, Nigger Award. Told you I'm on one today. The novelty of it all ain't helping. Performative bullshit. A thing down to basic, channels that water. Stereotypes, propagating propologic. The novelty of it. Told you I'm on one today. Questioning intentions, lining pockets. Fuck you, fuck, or getting fucked. Feels like the experience of racial difference in real time. Are you trying to free us? I wonder if he knows. Because that's what that shit felt like. Y'all should have just gathered around me in a circle and called me a nigger to my face. Today, I'm on one. Channels that water. From my eyes until the ducts are dry as my ashy winter elbows. This is my racial paradox, and explains well what Fred Moten and Stefano Harney mean when they say, the only possible relationship for the subversive intellectual to the American university today is a criminal one. Even though I'm defining my racial paradox through my academic life, all of these experiences, when boiled down to their essence, apply to all aspects of my life, because these are the same forms of racism, merely transmuted through institutional barriers.
Now this Michael Richards thing. Well, now I don't know him well. I've known him a long time, but I don't know him well. And I can remember years and years ago at the Comedy Store, he would get on stage, and he was always a very dynamic performer. Dynamic to the point that often audiences were frightened. But still, we all got a kick out of it because it was in good fun, and he was and is a very funny guy. And then we see this thing today where he goes nuts in some kind of club and is screaming at people. Have you talked to him? Do you know anything about this?
I did talk to him. I talked to him today, and you know, I was extremely upset about it, and he is extremely upset about it. And I asked him if he would come on the show tonight so that he could explain what happened, because it was just one of those awful things.
right.
And I think he's a little mystified about what happened, but I think most importantly, he wanted to...
We have him live via satellite
Yes,
from
we
Los
do.
Angeles. All right, this should be Michael Richards. Michael, are you there?
Yeah, I'm right here.
Hi, Michael. Welcome to the show.
Hello, hi.
How you doing?
I'm not doing too good.
Yeah. Why don't you explain exactly what happened for the folks who may not know?
I lost my temper on stage. I was at a comedy club trying to do my act, and I got heckled, and I took it badly and went into a rage, and said some pretty nasty things to some Afro-Americans, a lot of trash talk, and
Stop laughing. It's not funny.
And what were you were actually being heckled, or were they just talking and disturbing the act?
that was going on too.
Uh-huh. And did you...
I know, I mean, hearing your audience laugh, you know, and I'm not even sure that this is where I should be addressing the situation. I've already heard you make some jokes about it, and that's okay, you know, but I'm really busted up over this, and I'm very, very sorry to those people in the audience. The blacks, the Hispanics, the whites, everyone that was there that took the brunt of that anger and hate and rage and how it came through, and I'm concerned about more hate and more rage and more anger coming through, not just towards me, but towards a black-white conflict. There's a great deal of disturbance in this.
So this work, Untitled Cooning, is a work that I spent a lot of time on over the period of this residency. You know, of course, it relates to, you know, those videos of Michael Richards. And I remember watching that live. I remember seeing the TMZ video live. I remember watching the Letterman show and seeing that live. And I think it was like maybe one of my earliest moments with like maybe thinking about race critically, because there was such a drastic emotional response to both of those videos where, you know, the first, all I could feel was outrage. And then in the second, feeling really saddened by the fact that people laughed in the audience like this was all one big joke. And I feel like that really highlights a truth, right? Like this is what we truly fundamentally believe. And so, you know, I took a trip to a thrift shop, and I found this Kramer poster tucked behind some other memorabilia, and started going to work with this question in mind that relates back to what Sexton and Farley are writing about. But to what extent, you know, like to what extent does my participation in making visual culture reinforce this type of behavior, because people continue to believe that race is real and that blackness is something to be consumed. And I think that approaching it from that personal place, but then using like ways of injecting my literal self into this image. You know, those moments that we see, again, like this cross between you know, humor, satire, and reality. You know, this image of what's his name, Gene Wilder and Richard Pryor, you know, sort of mimicking Richard Pryor teaching Gene Wilder's character how to you know, be black, and he's donning blackface. And so this sort of representation that makes this act, this really harmful act, seem, you know, funny or something that's okay to do. again, thinking about sort of my stake inside of creating visual culture and what sort of impacts it might have, and on what level might I be cooning myself through participation. I'm happy to answer any questions, but that's it for now. I can keep my screen up, or yeah, I'm happy to stop sharing.
Yeah, thank you so much, Zora. That was really powerful. Yeah. Okay, so I have a question for you. I'm curious, so throughout that presentation, we saw artworks of all different types of media. I'm curious maybe if you could talk a little bit about your background, like where you kind of started with visual art, and maybe even your process, like how you decide from project to project what type of media to explore.
Yeah, so I got into art through studying photography, like practicing and studying photography. Was a photographer with a capital P, thought that, taking pictures was, the way for me to make art and express myself. But I've always had a desire to like try other things. I think it was just building up that confidence in yourself, to give yourself that permission or that license to like operate in this world as you see fit. But I think that challenge sort of started because my earliest kind of work that I put out into the world, titled Corrections, was looking at youth experience inside of the criminal justice system. And after I published a book of that work, I started getting coined as a prison photographer. And then I also started receiving a lot of like potential work from clients, like, oh, we're doing a story about, this prison system, or, we're writing a story about wrongfully convicted people, and we think you'd be a good fit because of your background. And while like that's true and that's great, that like those connections can be made, I had a lot of trouble with that because I was being categorized in this way that I didn't know if I felt comfortable with that. So I think that was like sort of kind of the early path into like just trying to transcend sort of these predetermined rules or boundaries. But then with, the pandemic hitting, going into lockdown, being in this kind of internal space, I started making work in my studio because that's what felt safest to me. And yeah, I just really started to flourish and I think it just, like sort of highlighted that like photography can like sort of solve a lot of like problems, like visual problems that I'm trying to solve and like things I'm trying to express. It can do that really well, but sometimes making a collage or an assemblage or a sculpture, it's like a better way of communicating an idea, like through form and material, and using that artwork to create a context inside of itself. Yeah.
No, that's awesome. Thanks for sharing that insight into your process. That's interesting to think about. Almost like branches of a tree.
Yeah.
To make from that idea first.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I'm curious too, you mentioned there was that piece that you included talking about the Fulbright statue. I'm curious about maybe a little bit about the status of that specifically. Have they made any moves to?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there was like a whole ass commission about it. Like they're like, so basically like a student group requested that like the statue be removed, that his name be stricken from the college. And so they made this whole commission, and so they think what they came up with, and I think this may or may not have changed, like as far as the statue goes, but they're like gonna move it to like a place that's still campus but not main campus, like just put him on a grassy hill and you can enjoy his racism on this beautiful hillside or something, I don't know. And then the college name, like they're just like, well, he's done more help than harm, so we'll keep his name. But we all know, like, you can't take his name off of it, because then people who give the college money are going to be like, we don't want, I don't know. So yeah, that's like the extent of it. That's where we're sort of at. Yeah.
That's pretty wild and interesting to see the kind of complicated maneuvers that kind of institution can take to avoid action,
Yeah, anything to keep those pockets lined.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wait and see if we have some more questions pull in.
I had a question.
Mm-hmm.
I was actually on a panel yesterday. We were talking about accessibility, and then through accessibility, we just talked about marginalized populations. So one of the lines that you said was, often we say, wow, it's hella white in here, let's just add some color, but we're still keeping the inequities clearly intact. And one of the questions that came up, which is clearly a big one, was, well, what do you do? What is an approach to closing that gap authentically? What does that look like? I mean, that's a huge question, but where do you start?
It seems like a huge question and like a daunting answer, when the answer is actually rather simple. Anyone who has any form of privilege inside of these institutions has to divest that privilege. Give up your job. Give up your job and guarantee it goes to somebody who's been excluded from working in this environment. It's the quickest way to do it, and we can talk about other pathways into it, but sort of the point that I'm at in all of this discussion now is just like, yeah, you got to divest. You have privilege, you want to make reparation, divest your privilege, spread your wealth, spread your opportunity, give it to other people, take it away from yourself. That's really the only way that we're going to solve this problem.
Thank you.
Yeah. I'm curious, so your work obviously takes on big contemporary political themes and has this social justice prerogative to it. I'm I'm curious how maybe you see that fitting in kind of the digital landscape and how that has predominantly become the way that we consume visual information in general, but art specifically. Does that mesh well with your intentions, do you feel, or contradict them in any way?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, like I really believe in photography. Like I guess, yeah, like I place a lot of emphasis on photography's social functions, but I think that's just sort of the way that I came into it, was working for the prison system, started photographing inside of that system, thinking about, you know, surveillance like as a big kind of phenomena inside of that, the camera playing a role. You know, thinking about the mugshot and its direct roots to enslavement, you know, it being used like to photograph enslaved people to support pseudoscience that like Black people are beasts and should be enslaved, right? And then that same tool is being used inside of a system that is just an evolved form of chattel slavery, right? So it's like I see these sort of connections, like just through my own experiences and things I've studied, and so I think that it fits well inside, like what I do fits well inside of the digital realm, because I'm purely talking about imagery, right? So like we can be imagery in a, you know, physical Polaroid in a family album, you know, to a fine art photograph hung in a museum, right? To, you know, like looking at Instagram, right? But that like, the image is ultimately what's important to me. And I think how we continually as a society have like held on to like this practice of making visual, you know, like things, both physical and digitally, right? Like, yeah, I mean, I think that like, yeah, my work's probably always going to survive through that because I'm purely talking about like visual imagery. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm interested. I think especially some of those assemblage and sculpture forms, like I feel I'm always particularly drawn to those three-dimensional pieces of art, and experiencing them in the third dimension feels like a big part of it, right?
Oh yeah, I guess, yeah, sorry. Maybe I wasn't maybe I wasn't understanding your question.
No, you're good, you're good.
I took a left turn there. Yeah, I think, yeah, especially the podium piece, because I feel like that work, like you can sort of understand it through seeing it, like through a visual image, like you can sort of put the pieces together, right? Everything's sort of available there. But the reason it's like a clear podium that's like freestanding in a space is so that, you know, the viewer is encouraged to walk up to it. That simultaneously like puts them in my shoes, but then also gets them to think about how they relate to like what I'm saying, right? And so, yeah, that can be a part of like, yeah, the artworks and experiences for sure. Yeah, thanks for asking that.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's cool to hear the variety of ways that these that you kind of can intend for the work to be consumed. So
yeah.
Cool. Do we have any more questions for Zora?
I'm curious if you and Rana ever collaborate or if your work stays completely disparate.
Yeah, actually, we do collaborate in a multitude of ways. So the first time we ever collaborated, we did a show together and we made this body of work, Fade Like a Sigh, which is just a collection of our images and was sort of like, I don't know, like maybe kind of a responsive way of working together where we were just taking images that we weren't really using for anything and then trying to figure out how we could like make something out of them together. So we do that, and then yeah, Rana sometimes like photographs things that she knows that I would be interested in photographing, and then she'll just give me the photos, you know, like yeah, so we collaborate in like these different ways.
Especially racist things.
Yeah.
I'll be like, not that that's funny, but you know what I mean? It's like, I'll definitely see shit, especially in the landscape that we live in. And I'm like, I know he can use it for something.
Yeah.
I feel like we have a tendency to really like, especially more and more, I think, like really blur like authorship in that way. Like, I'm not concerned with people knowing that I took this or he, you know, it doesn't matter to me. I think that it's really challenging, I think, for Zora to contribute to my work, like my personal work, given that it's so like about my family and stuff. And to implicating him in that work is problematic to me in a lot of ways. So that's why he's like not featured in it or anything. There's too many levels to that. But his work is a larger social commentary that I think there's many more entry points, and so being able to contribute in any way is always a joy for me, especially if we get to call out some shit. Love it. And I just want to mention that we got a dog yesterday, so that's a pretty big collaboration.
That's a pretty, yeah.
Alex can relate to that.
Yeah.
Oh, we curate shows too. I forgot about that.
Shows.
We do too much. I forget what we do.
Yeah,
sometimes.
we do a lot. Yeah, we've been really, really fortunate to be sort of steeped in this together, and we went to grad school together. It's how we met. So we sort of it's by design. A lot of it is like falls in line for sure. But yeah, we've been able to curate, like we recently curated a group show called Take It From Here, which features 10 amazing image makers that we're very fond of. From that, we collaborated with a colleague of ours at the University of Missouri, Travis Schaefer, to make the publication catalog for that. That went on to get a special nod, you know, for some bigger sort of awards. So we're just like, we just love sort of seeing the domino effect. If we can tip one over, and it can tip another one, we're always really excited about that. But yeah, everything from very, personal, intimate collaborations, like getting a dog, to trying to just sort of share whatever we can with other people. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, that's awesome. Congrats on those achievements.
Thank you.
Yeah. What can I ask? What kind of dog you guys got?
Well, we don't really know like what he is. He is from the Washington County shelter here. But we know that he's 2 years old. He's a damn good boy. And he is 43 pounds. So he's gonna stay a pretty medium-sized dog. And his dominant breed is German Shepherd. But he had to have been there has to be something small in there, some kind of terrier or maybe pit, something littler. So he's darn cute. And he's right down here. I wish I could show you, but he's
all right, awesome. Well, I think we have maybe one more question. I think this is specifically targeted towards Zora. So in your creative practice, do you find yourself more engaged in the process of taking photos and working with in-person subjects, or the process of editing, layering media after the photos have already been taken?
Before, I mean, it's still both, definitely. But before, like grad school, undergrad, grad school, it was all about like going out into the world, finding something to look at, right? But now it's like I still do that, like actually pretty minimally now. I haven't like taken my camera out for a minute. But yeah, it's like, like now I might like set up some sort of like funky still life in my studio, or like I'm like always making a collage of some sort. I've started painting. So yeah, I'm just kind of following impulse and trying to figure out, like, I want to express this idea, what's the best way to do that? And yeah, sometimes it's just like, if I just collect, I collect a lot of things too. Like that's become a big part of the practice now too, is like collecting images, collecting memorabilia. Like you go to a junk shop and you see a Kramer poster and you stare at it for 10 minutes and you're like, oh yeah, this could be something, right? Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. And I do see that you dropped a link into the chat.
Oh yeah, that's to the exhibition catalog that we curated.
Cool. I'm excited to take a look at that.
Absolutely.
I have a question that's geared more towards our audience. A lot of people at the Art Center are maybe like emerging artists. Some of them are, more experienced, but some of them are emerging. And I question what advice you have for them, and how to start building their portfolio, and what advice you would give them.
Think for yourself, question authority. I don't know, like those aren't my words, you can Google that, but no, but yeah, I just think that, I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of ways to get where you want to go. And I think it's really easy to feel like you have to do it a certain way, or do it the way like your professor mentor did it or something. And not all of us are born into the same, privilege, or have the same opportunities, or can do things on a particular timeline. You might have a child, you might be caring for, a sick family member. You might just want to be off the grid for 5 years. I don't know. There are a lot of reasons to pick that moment for yourself. So I just say, always trust your gut. It's your life, no one else's. And, truly you're the only one you can really count on to love you back in all of this. So trust yourself first. Yeah.
Yeah,
Zora?
I mean, like I don't have much to offer, like outside of that. I think I feel like definitely the same way as you. And I think it's just like, yeah, like make yourself into an artist. And I think I mean that in two ways. The first being that like you just have to make stuff, like no matter how dumb it might feel or crazy or whatever, like you just got to keep making things and you'll figure it out. You just got to keep making it. But then it's like you get to decide, like you're the one who gets to decide when you're an artist, right? Like, or if you are an artist, right? Like no one else can decide that for you. And it can be a lot of different things. I think as an educator, like, it's really great seeing our students graduate and like all of our students taking just these really drastically different paths for themselves.
Yeah.
Like one of our students started working at an art studio that was for individuals with intellectual disabilities, and was just like a studio assistant, was just like there to assist people with whatever they might need to make their artwork. But like they find a lot of joy in that, and it's like they thought like they might have to go into academia like to sort of be successful, but it's just about crafting what you need your life to be able to make your art, right? And there's a lot of different ways into that, not one right way.
Thank you. Also, I just got a puppy, so I feel you.
Yeah, we're those like annoying dog parents now, and it's only been like 28 hours or something.
Yeah, it's gonna get worse.
We're like, look at him, isn't he adorable? People are like, oh my gosh, leave us.
He looks like a dog. No, I know he is adorable. They all are.
Yeah, I can't thank you all enough for having us, not just tonight, but these last 2 months. Like I said, this is literally the first semester since, I say semester because you can see how I live on semesters. I think since 2014, I want to say, babe, like that we've both had the same like time off because of the support from this program. So I'm just really, really thankful for that. Thank you.
Well, thank you both. I think both of your presentations were really remarkable. And this was really exciting to hear more into your process and practice and specific pieces. So I look forward to the rest of our adventure together. There will be an exhibition at some point in the future at the Indianapolis Art Center featuring both of your works, which we're really looking forward to, along with some workshops that we will announce at that point too. So we'll have the opportunity to learn from you in that way as well.
Yeah, you're not going to get rid of us yet. We're going to be around for a second. But yeah, we're excited. I've never been, so I want to come out, want to do it all, do it up big. But yeah, thanks again. It's nice to have an extended sort of relationship with the place too. So thank you again, Alex, for everything you've done. I know you were thrusted into this, so appreciate you.
I appreciate the both of you. Yeah, it's been great.
Okay,
Awesome.
well, I guess are we saying goodnight? Should we say it now?
I think this is the time. Yeah, thank you everybody who was able to join. Thank you, Zora. Thank you, Rana. It's been really great.
Yeah, thanks to everybody tonight and in the future. See ya.
Awesome. Talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye.